All right, so yes, welcome to our first session here of our campus chats and coffee. And this is being presented by me, Bridget, from the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. I also vowed for each of these different sessions, I would have a different mug of coffee present. I hope you all brought some kind of warm beverage to enjoy. So today I'm rocking my little Dwight Schrute Bears Beats Battlestar Galactica mug. I'm a big Office fan, so that's what we're doing today with my coffee. All right, so welcome to the series. As I stated, this is facilitated by the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. We're a statewide coalition of 9 community-based centers, and then at our main office, we have some training, technical assistance, and other support for advocates throughout the state. We have a mission of ending sexual violence in all communities in the state of Connecticut. And living and being in a state that is free of sexual violence. And then personally, I'm our education and youth services coordinator. So I work with advocates and community partners that are in higher ed and K through 12 settings. And my own personal, mission and everything, I always want to ensure that my work is survivor centered, which is also part of the Alliance's mission. So we want to ensure that our work is being informed by survivors and that we're always taking their lead and following what they may need. I also have a special passion for campus work, given that I started my own activism in that space on my own college campus freshman year. So that's really where I found and came to love sexual violence work. So I'm really, thankful that I now have an opportunity to engage in it in this capacity. So today we're just going to go over some of the basics of campus sexual violence, what it looks like, sort of why we see these rates of sexual violence, as well as some of the barriers that survivors on college campuses face in particular. So we know, unfortunately, that college and university campuses are a space where folks do experience high rates of sexual violence. We know 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted while in college, and 1 in 16 men, according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. We do know that individuals at this age are at high risk of experiencing sexual violence, but what we do know is that when they're on a college or university campus, there are some barriers that they may face and a slew of other issues that need to be considered related to their enrollment at that institution. So, we also know that 90% of campus sexual assaults are actually committed by somebody that the survivor knows. So it's important that we consider some of the social, academic, and employment and housing impacts of that, right? If this is somebody that is part of this close-knit community as well, and we do know that the vast majority of individuals who commit sexual violence are also a member of the same campus community, then what does that look like in terms of their social groups, in terms of feeling safe going to classes that they might share with that person? So it's important to consider how frequently these individuals do know the person who harms them. Additionally, we also know that 84% of female survivors report being sexually assaulted during their first 4 semesters on campus. So that we know due to their vulnerability, right? Somebody who's new on campus doesn't have as many social supports, people to turn to, people that might be watching their back, right? Unfortunately, we know that these are individuals that are vulnerable to somebody taking advantage of that situation and perpetuating an act of sexual violence against them. So it's important to acknowledge what that looks like in terms of their vulnerability, but also what that looks like in terms of their progression at that institution, right? And if this is the way that they essentially start their college or university experience, they may not want to necessarily continue to engage at that institution. So why campuses specifically? So what about campuses sort of can increase violence occurring to certain folks? Why is this a place where it looks so unique? How is this facilitated specifically on campuses? So first, it's important to consider geography and the way that campus geographies look. and the opportunities that that might provide for individuals to perpetrate sexual violence. The campus, the university and college campuses that have housing typically have rather close quarters, right? And these are folks that are really sharing a lot of space. If somebody can't go back to their room for some reason, at some point, they're going to go to somebody else's room. They may or may not know that person so well. People are sort of forced to share space with people that they don't know very well or trust yet, even their own roommates, right? So this could increase the opportunities for individuals to offend, again, take advantage of people who are in a vulnerable position. Additionally, there are different power dynamics that are associated with geography, right? There are upperclassmen, dorms. There are different student organizations that may have a house or a hall. And there is a power dynamic that exists when these particular groups are allowed a certain geography. And therefore, when that power dynamic is in place, what do those interactions potentially look like? There's other power dynamics in place as well. Things like academic and social status, somebody's year in school, a freshman versus a senior, some sort of, control of space other than a dorm, right? So what does it look like if a certain group takes up a certain social space on campus? And of course, we know that when power dynamics are involved, that can really impact the way that somebody experiences sexual violence, either the prevalence or some of the different dynamics in that instance. Additionally, we know that drugs and alcohol are a significant part of college social life. So this is something that, may increase, again, that vulnerability or risk that somebody may have to experiencing sexual violence. Unfortunately, students are often afraid of experiencing blame or even punishment for that substance use if they were to come forward, either informally or formally to report what happened. And then we also know that substances are unfortunately also sometimes used as an excuse and to dismiss the harm that somebody might have perpetrated in a certain space. So they might say that they only did it because they were extremely drunk, and peers might say that that's a less significant offense against, to be perpetrating versus somebody who is sober, when realistically, what we really need to look at is the impact and how people are harmed by the action, regardless of the circumstances of that individual who had offended against them. Also, the role of sex is very unique on a lot of college and university campuses, and that it's sort of treated like a sort of accomplishment or an achievement rather than, an expression of intimacy or personal exploration. And doing this sort of dehumanizes sexual experiences. And if we pair that sort of need to achieve and need to sleep with a certain number of people or have a sexual experience after a certain party, if that is paired with entitlement, that's really a recipe for something that could be extremely dangerous and harmful. We also know that college and university students face a significant number of barriers that their peers that are not in those spaces might not necessarily face. So of course, there's an aspect of isolation, right? These are individuals that will potentially be lacking social supports, especially if they're at the beginning of their time at the college or university. They may also be isolated after disclosing sexual violence. When we think of these close-knit communities, oftentimes individuals will turn their back on someone who discloses because it's easier not to believe them, or because they've been manipulated into not believing them, or because they have misconceptions about what sexual violence looks like. So unfortunately, there's a significant role that isolation plays, either in having people come forward in the first place, and ultimately in regards to their ongoing healing and presence in the community. We also know that, campuses have different types of environments and cultures, but something that unfortunately we see frequently is that there's a rape culture on a lot of college and university campuses. at least in certain spaces. So this may cause others to blame survivors to blame themselves for what's happened or struggle to process the victimization in some way. And this can also cause backlash on a survivor who comes forward. Of course, as stated at the beginning, knowing the person who harmed them is also going to potentially be a barrier that they have to come forward, as well as an ongoing challenge that they face after coming forward. So this is somebody that they may be very close to, and they may not want to get them in trouble. They're afraid of the social impact of getting them in trouble or the social impact of coming forward at all. They may know that this is somebody that they're likely going to see around in mutual hobbies, mutual academics, at work. So with that in mind as well, they may be afraid to come forward, but also may continue to struggle in their community and need certain accommodations to ensure that they have space from the person who perpetuated that harm. Something really significant that I've, heard from a lot of student activists and survivors is that often it isn't the fact that the person is afraid of the person who harmed them themselves. Sometimes, of course, that is the case, but more frequently, it's just the harm in the way that they feel when they see that person. So the panic, the re-traumatization that can occur when they see that person that harmed them. So it's important to understand that, so we don't necessarily dismiss folks that may say that they don't feel safe, when realistically we know that, the person who has stated that, the person who's harmed them has stated that they're no longer going to have contact with them. They've abided by that thus far. Somebody is absolutely valid in just feeling unsafe because they are, uncomfortable and experiencing, the effects of trauma when they see that person. The aspect of, simultaneous processes is also something that's unique to campus communities and something that can create a challenge. There are, of course, Title IX proceedings and other campus conduct proceedings that can take place. But of course, these are also instances that survivors may report to a local police department. So to consider which process they want to pursue, the different status of those processes. These are also complicated processes. So they're attempting to kind of follow these two challenging and complex tracks simultaneously can be really difficult. And we find that a lot of folks will burn out because of that. The role of substances can also create a challenge. We know that more than half of all survivors have an experience that involves drugs or alcohol to some extent. And this, of course, never, ever, ever makes it a survivor's fault. Unfortunately, we do know that survivors may blame themselves, however, after that experience, which can be a barrier to reporting or finding reprieve. We also know that depending on the substance or the quantity of use, they may only remember parts of the incident, which can, of course, create a challenge during reporting. And then institutions are also really insular spaces. So it's hard for something to be impacted without sort of it having a ripple effect, right? All aspects of someone's life are typically impacted when this happens. This is where they live, this is where they learn, this is potentially where they work. This is where their social scene is, the hobbies and activities they're engaged in, right? In registered student organizations. So due to the really insular spaces that these communities present, we know that somebody can feel closed off to the entire community after this occurs, rather than just a segment of that community. We also know that due to this, there are some studies that suggest about a third of college and university students who have an experience of sexual violence that they report end up leaving that institution before graduation. So it would make sense, right, that somebody might not feel safe at that space, in that space anymore. They might just be totally isolated. It might be a reminder of the trauma they experienced, and they want to create that space. But of course, this has a significant academic impact as well, as they'll have to transfer, see if they can, pull over their credits and things of that nature, see if they can find another place where they feel comfortable. And ultimately that can create a significant impact to their, professional trajectory and things of that nature. So with that kind of intro being said and done, I just wanted to sort of frame this conversation and where we're going to be headed next. So next week on March 18th, we're going to be talking about Title IX specifically, as that's a unique process to educational spaces, both K through 12 and higher ed, but we see, a sort of different role that it plays in higher ed spaces. Title IX has also been really rapidly changing. So we're going to talk about what it looks like now with the regulations that are currently in place, with some advice we've gotten from the current Biden administration, what we're seeing down the road, and how all of these different, regulations and advice have sort of played out in practice. The week after that, we're going to be talking about enforcing student rights. So say somebody goes through a campus misconduct process, somebody goes through a Title IX hearing, and they don't feel as if their institution is protecting them. Then what's next? What sort of recourse can they proceed with all of that in mind? On week 4, we're going to be talking about campus legislation in Connecticut and ways that college and university students experience additional protections. Campus advocates experience a certain right to be in spaces in order to advocate for students. And so we're going to be talking about that specific legislation. Also, I just want to note that there is a gap between March 25th and April 8th. April 1st, the Alliance is going to be kicking off Sexual Assault Awareness Month through a Child Sexual Abuse Awareness Roundtable. So that's why that gap is there. You're more than welcome to attend that event as well. That will be open to the public, but we will have a little break there. Week 5, we're going to be talking about public reports. So understanding what needs to be reported to Clery and who needs to report it, who needs to report for Title IX purposes, and what the institutions need to provide to the state under state legislation. There are certain statistics and information that need to be provided to the legislature. And then on April 22nd, we're going to be wrapping it up, talking about what's next, talking about what students can what resources students can turn to, as well as what opportunities there might be for activism and how to engage in activism in a way that is going to be most effective. So we're going to be doing this every Friday at 10 a.m. We're going to be posting it on Monday mornings. So definitely keep an eye out for those public videos. Feel free to distribute those around. And then hopefully you'll continue to attend these sessions. So thank you very much for joining us today for this.